So it's all a part of this. We're just gathering informally right now to reflect on time in the anatomy lab. And one of my new friends, May Kessler, is joining us for a few minutes before she has a client. May is a terrific dancer and body worker. And she's actually just talking about something we talked about earlier today in my body-based voice community, where we were talking about the difference between classical, traditional architecture that is on a 90-degree bias, but requires triangulation for stability. You know, you need all these triangles and all the 90-degree angles for it to be stable, where I dream about having a geodesic dome home that's fully triangulated, which is material efficient, needs less stuff, because it's all leaning in on each other and supports itself through tension and compression, just like biotensegrity, which is an emergent model for understanding things that are alive, whether it's humans, slime molds, pets, trees, etc. So we're gaining the benefit of my new friend May, and we worked together a lot on one of the cadavers. We had a similar interest. So May, please continue. What a great extra gift.
Well, the other thing that to segue from that, you know, you noticed, and I noticed too, not only in the front of the throat, but then down the back, was the chevrons or X's that the body created. And you can see that here in the V of your neck. And we peeled these away, and under that was another set of a different V, and maybe it was inverted. And then under that, one going down and one going up, all the way down to the deepest tissues, which was really kind of mind-blowing how beautifully perfect it was. Now, we all like to think about two-dimensionality here, but when you think about what are those structures doing, they are actually curving. Like if you have an X and you take the X and you curve it, it turns into a spiral. It has to, because we're three-dimensional.
So let's back up a sec. Let's back up a sec. Yeah. Let's paint a picture. So we're in the middle of this conversation about this time in the anatomy lab, and May and I wound up working on a cadaver. And let me just sort of actually back up a little bit. So this was a really interesting opportunity to be able to be in an anatomy lab, where normally that's really reserved for people who are much more close in to reason to want to be in an anatomy lab, not voice teachers, and maybe not massage therapists, but other folks who are much more clinical in their practice potentially. And so these amazing and gifted researchers and anatomists, mostly from the UK, including John Sharkey. And if you look up that name, you'll see a lot of research coming from Sharkey. Joanne Avison, who's a yoga therapist and also a researcher in her own right. Wilbour Kelsick, who is a coach for Canadian Olympic athletes. I mean, the dissection team was outstanding, but they facilitated anybody who wanted to have the experience being able to have the experience of being in the anatomy lab. And so it was a really interesting opportunity for somebody like me, because I'm so interested in understanding the body in a way that makes sense to me, because so much of my learning didn't make sense to me. The way I was taught to sing was very, very intangible. And so I've sort of been on this quest to understand better, to understand myself better, understand how I can learn and teach myself better, and understand how I can work with other people better. And just the spiral of learning took me down this rabbit hole of biotensegrity, which led me to several other rabbit holes, including fascia, where I was exposed to all these amazing people, all these amazing scholars, researchers, anatomists, etc. And when I saw that all these names were going to be together in a room in Ohio, a 4.5-hour drive from where I live, there was no question I was going to go and be a part of that, and amazing that I could. Great. Yes. Closed captioning. Is it on? Do I have to do something?
I don't think so.
Here we go.
I think it's on.
Good idea. So we get into this room, and there are 5 or 6 cadaver forms in bags. You know, we don't see them, and the only real instructions we got were to go slow and wear gloves and use the pliers, the hemostat, to put the scalpel on the handle because they're really sharp. They didn't tell us anything else. They didn't teach us how to do anything. Now in the room, there are people who are really, really capable and really experienced at cadaver dissection. Some of them are anatomists, some of them are anatomy teachers. Some people came for the practice of dissection. Some people came because they don't have the opportunity when they're teaching students to do it themselves. And those people who are the anatomists and anatomy teachers also say, we've got to only teach certain things. And this is really important for the implications of our mental models when we think about teaching whatever we're teaching, if it has to do with the body. But that in the model of anatomy hasn't changed since the days of like Borelli and Vesalius and Leonardo. I mean, that we are operating with a very outdated model of anatomy, which I mean, I'm looking at a face of Zoom room of folks that know me and probably have heard me say this, but anatomy, when you translate it from Latin, means to cut up. So we've got to look at anatomy in and of itself as a model. It's not the real thing. It's the real thing that's been broken down into parts and pieces. And if you put those parts and pieces back where they were, you don't get a fully formed thing anymore. It's dead. And it was dead to begin with. And so already we're several layers away from learning the truth. The truth is when we're alive. And how do we understand ourselves while we're alive? We've got to find ways in, and using a cadaver to understand can only get us so far. But the point I want to make is that nothing has changed drastically from 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago to now in the way that anatomy is taught. It's still taught in parts and pieces as if those parts and pieces are all that we have. May was talking about a leverage system. Our arms look like they're levers, but by definition, a lever is open at both ends. We have no levers. There are no levers in the body, but there's leverage-like action. There are no pulleys because it's all interconnected. If you had a pulley that was connected to another pulley, you got complexity. You got chaos. And that's more what we want to understand of what the behavior is between the skin and the bones, including the skin and the bones, that there's this quantum chaos under there. And the way they arrived at this anatomical model, this model of cutting up the body, was by removing that which keeps it in its integral form, removing the connective tissue that both joins distinct areas and keeps them distinct from each other. And that's the fascia. And it was believed that was just connective tissue, just stuff holding everything in place, tensioning the body. But now we research it and we realize that it's a real rich sensory organ, maybe our richest sensory organ.
Yeah.
It is sentient. It is feeling, it is listening, it is highly innervated and differently innervated depending on where it is in the body, listening to the environment with its antennae, listening to the internal body with its antennae, having a dialogue. It is such a rich part of our life experience. And when you learn about it and learn about biotensegrity, I experienced this and I watch other people experience this, they go, oh, that makes sense. That's like how I live my life. That's a felt experience I have, where if I ask you to, like identify the muscles you use when you walk, kind of clunky, but the feeling of my foot hitting the ground, I know what that feels like. And feeling how the foot dragging back on the ground makes my form move forward because of the interconnectedness and the intercommunication network that is fascia. It starts to align to our experience of being alive. And that's what we really want. And that's what we want to be as teachers, able to help somebody work with themselves as if they're alive, as if they're functioning, not as if they are pieces cut out of a dead form. So we're in the anatomy lab and they don't give us any instructions. They just say go, but go slow. Because once you're working with the scalpel, you don't realize the power you have. And if you cut through something you want to see, you will not see it how you wanted to see it. It's too late. And so it took me a while, and I wrote some reflections. I don't want to just go over those reflections. It took me a while to become comfortable. It was not easy for me at the beginning. But after lunch, I kind of put on my big boy pants and just said, don't miss it. Don't miss this experience. And I started to work alongside May. And May was working around the neck And so I started to work on the other side, and we slowly reflected, which is the word they say to mean like dissect it off. We reflected the dermis, the skin, and saw the beautiful sternocleidomastoid muscles, which, you know, the name of the muscle implies that it starts and ends somewhere. Sterno, like sternum, cleido, clavicle, mastoid process. So we have an idea of beginning and end, but in the real body, these things don't begin nor end. The idea of origin and insertion is a model that is useful. And I don't want to say these things are I'm not judging any of these things, because I believe they have their time and place. It's not pedagogically useful to say everything is connected to everything. What do you do from there? Right? Like, that's a really nice truth, but sometimes you have to reduce things to be able to build them back up into the whole. So reductionism is an important part of seeing the bigger picture. But what we saw with the sternocleidomastoid was that they didn't actually attach to anything but themselves. The muscle fibers tapered off, and then it became this beautiful network of fascia that crossed over itself. And May was describing a few moments ago how we saw all these V's, and when a V continues, it becomes an X. And if that V continues into an X around a spherical form, eventually it becomes a spiral. And so there are all these spirals throughout the body on the macroform, microform. Collagen fibrils are spiraled. And DNA is spiraled, our cochlea is spiraled. We have spirals throughout our whole body if we look for them. Our concha, our turbinates are little spirals. We got spirals, even my hands, I'm just noticing I'm spiraling in my fingers. I move like a spiral. My muscles are spiraled around my body. But what was so fascinating was that when you look at the sternocleidomastoids, they dissipate and just become more tissue that moves outwards from there. And then moving a little deeper in, we have these muscles. What is it? The sternothyroid or sternohyoid, right? Which is another V inside this bigger V. And then we have the cricothyroid and the thyroarytenoid. No, cricothyroid, thyrohyoid, which we think of as independent units, but they're totally continuous with each other. And so if I'm going to look one way, I'm not using one muscle and then the other muscle. I'm using them as a continuity, as I am with all the other V-like muscles that I was just describing, that they're working as a unit, but they look like a fractal, or like when you look into one of those magic mirrors that have all those lights in it and you can see forever, but the lights seem to tunnel into each other. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a mirror. I'll have to post a picture somewhere. Doing a great job. But that it's a self-similarity, which is also true down to the nano level, that if you look at the tissues of the macro body, you see something, and then you look a little closer in and you see something really similar, and you keep going in and in and in, and eventually you don't see separation. You just keep seeing patterns that repeat like a fractal. And so we're looking at a fractal geometry. And it's right there in the biggest macro form that we can see. And I think that there's good implications about how thinking about muscles as individual units of movement doesn't necessarily stack up to the smooth movements we want to embody. And if you've heard me talk to Sasha, you know about glide. May, please chime in.
Yeah, I only have like 5 minutes, so I'm like, this is great. I really wish, I love this. I want to talk more. Going back to what you said, in the beginning of anatomy studies, they did have a more holistic view. And then came this sort of separation of church and state and body. And then that's where anatomy cut it up came from. So you want to think about it. First, they didn't. They wanted to look at the whole thing. And then we started to, zero in on looking at parts. So the parts, the other thing about fascia is that the connective tissue, the web, goes down to the cellular level. That was a big mind blow for me, because that means that every cell is surrounded with a thread from the fascia. So when one little thread is pulled anywhere in our web, that changes everything. slight change changes everything. Just try that. Just move your head the slightest bit. You notice your whole body has to respond. Your whole body responds, from your foot to your pelvis to your spine, to let this happen. So that's that was that connection there. And oh my gosh, then I forgot about what else I was going to say after that. The connection, interconnection, the spirals. What else was it?
And it's not just recently that we thought about fascia and connective tissue, like Andrew Taylor Stills, the founder of osteopathy, was writing about fascia. I mean, people have been writing about fascia and imagining fascia, and there are some very historic drawings that include the fascia in a very beautiful and artistic way. It just hasn't made its way into a mainstream model for understanding.
And and another reason why is when I got to physical therapy school, which was a bunch of decades ago, we had everything formaldehyde preserved, which is what we actually did in the lab. But there are other ways of preserving a body, more with saline. And so formaldehyde dries the tissue. The saline preserving keeps it soft. So that was another part about that when you separate the body, it's not just that it's separate, but it's, as you said, it's like the connections are severed as well. So you can't see, if I move my finger, that that moves all the way up, if you're just like looking at the hand alone. So there's that part. But then the fascia, when we are taught dissection, it's on a formaldehyde preserved body where the fascia is extremely dehydrated, and you're looking at something close to a leaf in November, as opposed to in my body, it's a leaf in May, which is green and tough and holds together, versus in November, it's dried up and it breaks easily. So when we saw the fascia, the web-like stuff, break up as we took our scalpel, in the real body, wouldn't be that easy, and it would be much more gel-like and fluid-like.
If you watch Strolling Under the Skin, this wonderful documentary that's on YouTube by Jean-Claude Guimbarteau, you'll see what May is talking about. It's basically snot. It looks like snot or goo, and it's a good image, but it's snot that has a tensile strength of stainless steel. So there's a non-Newtonian aspect to it, where there's a real stiffness that can come through force that gives us the capacity to move in a variety of expressions, a variety of ways. But yeah, and even to go a little bit further than that, May, I was reflecting just the other day about how the cadaver form we were working on seemed to have been dead a lot longer than the original one that they showed us, who was a younger man, and his tissues were much more hydrated. He was far less desecrated. He looked much fresher. I don't know how to say it another way, but there was a real difference in the quality of tissues. He was also a younger person, and so that person would have had more
fluidity,
hydration.
His tissue, more hydration in his tissues. The other thing is the first person we looked at was very heavy, and he had a lot of fat layer around him. And the person that we had worked on was very, very, well, he was almost too slim and had very little fat, and that might have insulated him too. So we don't know why.
Yeah. And there's just a million possibilities, and all we can know is that we were working on dead tissue, and dead tissue that's been dead for maybe a long time, maybe months in a fridge, that's been embalmed. So we're not seeing a real thing, but we're getting closer.
The other thing for the voice that was really I wanted to see, because as a PT, I see a lot of people with headaches and TMJ issues, and I know as singers you're using this area. And I wanted to see, I've been learning a lot about tongue placement, that, the forward thrust of the tongue leads to a forward head. I'm also an Alexander Technique student for 40 years. So I'm always thinking about, what does this forward head do? And again, mind blowing to see how strong the connection of the tongue is to the front of the cervical spine. When we think about our neck, we think this is our neck, the back. but your neck is this, the whole 360. And the tongue strongly connects to several of the vertebrae in front of the spine. So if your tongue is jutting forward, it is going to pull you forward, shorten these muscles, and not make them as available to you. So that just blew me away, along with that the tongue then connects down to the pericardium.
Mm-hmm.
So
pericardium is the heart sleeve.
Right. The part that surrounds the heart, the insulation for the heart. So when you use your tongue, you're directly connecting to your heart, which is one to think about for singers.
Before we lose May, does anybody have any questions? Let's just sort of open the floor. This doesn't have to be just chit chatting. What are you chewing on, Lisa? If you want to share.
I mean, we're early in this conversation, but I want more also, May. And I like the visual that your tongue is connected to your heart sleeve is like amazing. It's just, I'm in.
And then go further because the heart sleeve is firmly attached to the diaphragm.
Breathing. Right? Yeah.
Like firmly, like absolutely. Yeah. And we could keep going further and further and further and go, oh my God, I'm singing from my feet. I really am, because there's a legitimacy to the way that the fascia is interconnected. And as May was beautifully describing before, when I move one part, I'm moving everything, which is part of the Tai Chi classics as well. When one thing moves, everything moves. And it can't not be true. And so if we're looking for isolated control, which is a, thanks, John. It was nice to know you were here. Hope you're well. If you're looking for isolated control, which there are some voice models that are about isolated control, and I've taught them, and there's time and place, but it's not a reality. It's a model. It's a model for understanding how something can contribute vocally. But the reality is, if I'm moving something, I want other things to move. And the body will go with, if I say, I'm going to move this and I'm going to hold this still, I can teach myself a movement pattern where I move this and hold this still and create a habit out of that. There's nothing that the body will do that. Brain will go along for the ride. It's just listening to what you're telling it to do and trying its best. But we don't necessarily want that kind of rigidity, right? We want fluidity through the system. We want to work with the system as it is. The system is interconnected. Why do we want to treat the system like it's not? We want to align our pedagogy, our ideas, our thoughts about movement and singing, whatever your interest is in this subject matter. We want to align that to our realities. And when we align it to our realities, we work better because we're talking to the nature of our form. How it is, not how we want it to be. And it doesn't matter how we want it to be, because how it is how it is.
I'm so sorry. I have to go. This is lovely. I hope you get to continue and we can visit again.
Thanks, May. I want to go to that architecture class if I can.
Okay, I will send you the link.
Thanks for coming, doll. See you soon. Stay well.
Nice to see. Keep singing, everybody.
See you soon, May. So we started to work on the masseter or the jaw area. She was very interested in the TMJ, which was, we were like, is it here? 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 And one of our dissection team leaders was like, yeah, it's here. And then he showed us on a model and he pointed to another place around this area, not the place where he pointed to before. And it's a fascinating thing to think that there is no joint. Like, what is a joint? It's a thing with a hinge, right? It's got something that it's rotating around. But where is that in the body? And if you listen to Joanne Avison speak, she speaks very eloquently about there are no levers, there are no joints, there are no pulleys, there is no pins holding something in place so that there can be an articulation. There is tensioned fabric between the skull and the jaw. So where is the TMJ? Where is it exactly? I don't have an answer. And maybe there is one, I just don't have it. But when you're looking at the body, it's like, I don't know. The thing is stiff. The thing isn't moving very easily. And you can massage it. And people did work with the tissue. We weren't just like hacking away at bodies. We were working with tissue. And I actually gave a tongue a massage for quite a while, for not to just massage it, but I wound up massaging it to sort of feel where the fascia was taking me inside. But as I was doing that, I was like, oh my God, this thing is getting softer. And we think about in our own movements that when we move, we're hydrating through our movements. And when we don't move certain areas of ourselves, they get stiffened. But movement can restore the hydration so they're no longer stiff. Hydration being both bound up water, hyaluronic acid, and other components. But hyaluronic acid is what gives us the gliding feeling. So some people supplement hyaluronic acid in their diets to increase the ability to move with ease. So I'm working on this tongue and I'm feeling it get more hydrated because I'm moving it. And maybe it's just a fluke or just an experience I had and there is no hydration happening. But in another interesting way, when we reflected out the ribs and I was holding a smoker's lungs in my hands, and it was very evident this person was a smoker. It was fascinating to guess how these people died. There was a pacemaker, the lungs were very blackened. But as I was holding on to a lobe of the lung and just gently like feeling its elasticity and exploring what that felt like, I was watching how I was moving air from within it to other parts of that same lobe. We think of the lungs as sponges. We talk about them like sponges, and it's almost true. It's a sponge that's closed, though. If I squeeze a sponge, the water will run out. If I squeeze that lobe of the lung, the air doesn't come out of the lung. It moves to another part of the lung. And if I keep squeezing it, it would move out of the mouth or out of the nose. It's a closed system. That was sort of a new additional image to that idea of sponge. It's a closed system. And so I was moving air inside of tissue that still had a little bit of elasticity and air in it. I was literally watching like pushing on a balloon that's blown up. Another part's going to inflate if I squeeze one part. So it was fascinating to see that there's still remnants of function. And there's an interesting video of Gil Hedley's. I think it's, if you look up Gil Hedley on YouTube, intercostals, there is a part of it where he manually is breathing a cadaver. He has reflected the intercostal muscles out. So you see the ribs and I think you see the lungs, but he pushes on the lungs. And then when he releases it, you hear, because there's still elasticity in the tissues. So he's manually breathing a body that's been dead for however many months. And this is the think that I chew on frequently is, for as complex as we think the body is, and it is, we have remarkably simple, stupid, simple interventions. If somebody's not breathing, blow in it. If somebody's heart's not beating, push on it. Their heart's not, give it electricity. Like, it's so simple. We're hydrated, more water in, more water in. You know, there's some really almost like too simple to be effective, but maybe there is a simplicity to the elegance in the complexity. I don't know. So we were working on uncovering the jaw, the SCM, and looking at the beautiful temporalis muscle, which is like this tree growing upwards and outwards, and watching how as it tapered down towards the cheekbone, it almost spiraled in to rope-like tendons, which was really kind of cool. And at one point I was my goal was, I wanted to get to the larynx, obviously, but I was hoping I could get to the larynx and keep the vocal tract or parts of the vocal tract intact. So with this cadaver that I was working with May on, we were figuring out what would be the best way. Do we remove the jaw? How do we remove the jaw? What do we do? And so eventually I took some garden pliers. And a content warning, by the way, we're going to talk about cadaver dissection today. Took garden pliers and cut the cheekbone out and saw that the tendinous fibers didn't end around the cheekbone. They kept going down, down, down to the bottom of the mandible, underneath the masseter muscle. So this temporalis muscle over here continues in tension, and tension is bound energy. So we've got all this stored up energy all the way to the bottom of the jaw, and then the masseter that runs upwards to the cheekbone. Also an interesting evidence of biotensegrity in the body, how things are interconnected, continuous tension around discontinuous compression, like this tensegrity icosahedron, where it's kept in its form by the tensioned yarn that's all a communication network, while these struts of chopsticks aren't touching one another. But if I move one, the whole thing moves. And so we've got some muscles connecting mandible to skull, other muscles connecting skull to cheekbone. And so we've got this sort of interconnected way of having the jaw stay where it's meant to be through tension, but also able to move. And they say, you know, masseter is one of the strongest muscles or the strongest muscle or something. And I wonder if that is taking into account the fact that we've got all this tendinous, temporalis tendinous stuff also supporting all that we do with our jaw, between our jaw and our head. So it's no wonder that we have a lot of folks feeling like they've got TMJ, temporomandibular joint disorder. We've got a whole lot of tensioned fabric here. So there's a logic there, and there's probably a reason for it too. Yeah. Just checking the chat. So that was a really interesting aha, just watching how that fascia continued way further down than I ever imagined it to be. That really changed my image of what that was all about. I eventually moved on from that cadaver because I walked the room the whole time. Every time I was like, I need a break from this, the formaldehyde smell, I need to move away. There was a lot that was just stomach turning. It was not all like being at Disney World. It was really fascinating, really fun, but also sometimes like I got myself real close to a garbage can just in case. And so I was walking around the room and just seeing what everybody was doing, and I got to, see the spinal cord and see how it sort of frays at the end, and it looks electric. It's so cool. The tendons of the leg that are like thick ribbons, and they're glistening. They're silvery and they reflect light. They're truly beautiful. It's like Christmas. Those tendons are so silvery and shining. Very interesting stuff all over the room, but there was one cadaver form where they were working on the viscera, and they had, with garden pliers, cut all the ribs, and they just sort of had the rib basket up and over the face, essentially, to be able to get everything in here. And I just sort of saw like this opportunity to get through the larynx from underneath, where we were trying to get on the other cadaver to the larynx from above. I saw this opportunity. So some people felt like, this is the one I'm working on. I was like, do you mind if I work over here while you're working over there? Nobody cared. So I finished the job with the ribs, and I saw that the larynx was still connected to the trachea in part. The trachea was cut a couple inches down before it branched off, but the esophagus was completely connected right behind, which was really fascinating to see. And I wanted to leave as much intact as possible. And so I started to try to figure out how to get my scalpel where I wanted to get my scalpel to get under the larynx. And eventually I just did blunt dissection, which is using your hand. And I just sort of wiggled my hand underneath. It's smooth. You can feel fibers breaking as you massage and work your hand underneath, and just slowly disconnect the larynx from what's behind it. And I kept working my hand up and around and up and around, so the larynx is essentially in my hand, and I'm working up and I'm working up, and I'm like, I don't know where I'm gonna go. I don't know where this hand's gonna wind up. It's not gonna wind up in the mouth, I don't think. Will I get to the nose? Where will I actually wind up? And so I put my other hand inside the mouth and felt my hands touching each other through some tissue. I could feel there was not a lot there, but I wasn't touching my hand. There was something between. And I went, okay, so I need a way for this hand to meet this hand. How do I make that happen? And this is a little bit like, ugh. I started to cut along the gum line. I thought, like, get as much as possible. That is real thin tissue over there. And so I went where it was easier, and I cut where the threshold between the hard palate and soft palate is. And so I cut along the soft palate. And then I could get my hand all the way up into the mouth. And I was like, okay, cool. But how do I get this whole thing down and out from? And so I just was like, I'm gonna use every tool in the room. Like, I don't want to not have this experience be as full as possible. So I got myself a bone saw, and I cut the mandible here and here. And I had already freed up all this tissue. There's a lot here. Talk about like why people have some tongue tension. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Really densely connected, like May was saying, densely connected here, densely connected there, densely connected. That tongue, she wants to stay connected to a lot of stuff. But yeah, so I had already freed that up and I removed here, and then I just basically reached in and I took the whole thing out. Tongue, soft palate, hyoid, larynx, the whole thing as a unit. That was about this big. The trachea was like this small. The cricoid was like that big. The thyroid was like this big. And this was a female form. So it's a smaller and wider thyroid, but smaller everything. Old, frail, looked like an old lady who died when she was ready to die. And so all her parts were quite small. And I just sort of held this thing, and it was just a marvel in my hand. And I just couldn't believe that I had the whole thing intact. And then I went over to the original cadaver and I was like, zip, zip, and I just cut the larynx out. I was like, I don't need to work so hard on this one anymore. And I just went and reflected the larynx from hyoid through just the beginning of the trachea. So I have a larynx, a male larynx, and a female vocal tract and larynx. And this was, I think, day 4. This is day 4. It took a while to get there. And I spent the rest of that day and the next day cleaning it up and really just admiring it and looking at everything I could see before I had to say, I have to let this go, because I want to keep it. I want this felt like artwork in my hands. This felt like something that I had never known I wanted to experience, never imagined how it would be to experience, but I just wanted it to just be like this always. And I said, no, dig in, just, cut it open, look at it more. And so I kept the vocal tract and larynx intact for a lot longer, and I opened up the back of the pharynx, because I was able to keep the pharynx with the larynx, of the second form. And I opened up the back of the larynx. It was like window shutters, looking into the thyroid, looking into the epiglottis, which is like so tiny. Everything's so tiny. Eventually I looked at the vocal folds and I was like, meh, nothing. They're nothing. They're just like, if you look in the back of your mouth and you see those pillars back there, less eventful than that. Like, just nothing there. But cadaver, dehydrated, who knows how long been dead, embalmed, but nothing to see there. I at the very end, I tried to reflect the arytenoid and vocal folds, and I couldn't quite figure out how to get around the arytenoid. I didn't have a lot of time, and I just went, there's nothing to see here, but there's other things where I could maybe learn. So and that's really what I came to see, was vocal folds, and try to understand how vocal folds became other things that we name in an anatomical model. And what I learned was that I couldn't see that, and that maybe there is a way of seeing that in a human, in a live body, or in a not embalmed body. But what I did see that really shocked me was, as I started to reflect the pharynx away from the larynx. I don't know why I thought it would be like, make an incision here and just sort of take that off, like it was like a hat. But I cut along the side of the thyroid cartilage. And for those of you who want to orient, the thyroid cartilage is your Adam's apple cartilage. So if you feel around your Adam's apple cartilage inside of this strappy sternocleidomastoid, you could feel that it's taller in the back, and there's some horns, and that's where the pharynx connects to. So I thought I just sort of cut along there and then look in, or open up like a book. But the fascinating thing about the dissection, no matter how sharp the scalpel is, you can work against the grain, I mean that metaphorically, and work kind of hard, or you can sort of find a flow of the fabric, and then it'll just go, and it'll just all fall apart. And so I found that angle where the dead tissue in my scalpel just interacted like a dance, and I just went right in, and it led me inside the thyroid cartilage and was completely continuous with the thyroid cartilage. So if this is my thyroid cartilage, my Adam's apple is my middle fingers, this is the thyroid cartilage, and here's the pharynx, the throat space in which we resonate. This throat space is continuous, completely creates the inside lamina, the inside membrane of the thyroid cartilage. And from there arises the vocal folds and false vocal folds and false vocal folds. So the vocal folds and false vocal folds are a part of the inside wall of the thyroid cartilage, which is the pharynx. So this is where it's so fascinating to think of the anatomical models that we think about, and the ways we organize instructions to do things with the vocal folds as a separate from the pharynx. But if you think about regions of the body being like neighborhoods, what's happening on this street where I live, I'm much more aware of, but I'm also a little bit aware of the culture of the neighborhood, which is somewhat different, but somewhat similar to the culture of the city, which is inside of Ontario, the province, which is inside of Canada, which is inside of North America. And I could use my phone to call anywhere in North America. And in the olden days, I'd have long distance charges because I'm going to use area codes that are not my own. So the further away I call, I'm going to get a different size of a bill later in the month, but I could just call across the street to my neighbor. I don't need a phone for that. So if we think of the body like that, then is it the same house? Is it the same floor of the house? Is it the same room that the thyroid and the vocal folds and the pharynx occupy? How do we separate those into function when they're made of the same walls? They're made of the same stuff. They are the same thing, but they function distinctly. I have no answers. It's just fascinating that they are that interrelated. And I don't even like that word. I don't know what word. They're just the same piece of fabric. The same piece of fabric. This thicker part of my sweater is no different than the thinner part of my sweater. It's just folded in. Oh, that's an accidental metaphor that's completely relevant, because how the body forms is through folding, like origami. Folding and then folding and folding and then folding, folds in on itself, called an invagination process, creating tubes of tubes. So there is this constant folding and unfolding that creates all the shapes that we see. But in Joanne Avison's words, we don't have parts, we have distinctions, which I think is a fascinating thing. Any thoughts that anybody wants to share, or questions? Yes, Maria, I saw that hand move.
Hi. It is so fascinating. I've heard this described before from someone who didn't do the whole cadaver dissecting classes anywhere, but still got the gist of everything's connected to everything. And it is so true, even though it is too easy to put it like that. I've been teaching in a university today with a lot of singers who are, they're 20 to 24-year-olds, and they're just blank. They have no idea what's going on in their bodies when they sing, how it's supposed to work, what to do if it doesn't work, and also just haven't even connected the dots between muscle, bone, cartilage, and sinew at all. So to start with everything is connected to everything is the starting point, but it's also the finishing point, even when you go into detail like this. And yeah, my mind is reeling right now. How am I going to transfer the stuff that I know from being a massage therapist and touching people and knowing that this is how it works when I do the massage techniques to the teaching of singers and their relationship with their own voices, but then again into a classroom where everybody is desperate for knowledge about the body and how it actually works, and where the muscle is just a concept that they grasp much easier than any of the other concepts, because it's been around longer, because we were taught in physical ed in high school that muscles is what we need to train. When we train our bodies, it's the muscle tone and muscle form and muscle strength. And just getting to the point where we see a bigger structure is so fascinating. So thank you, Jeremy. Just putting these things out there and looking at them is so super helpful, but it's a massive undertaking that we have to do if we want to understand this in a better way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all that. It's the what you said resonates so much, because I'm still sitting. What's interesting is I didn't have a lot of reflecting after the experience was done. Nothing was really bubbling up. I had a couple moments where I looked at my boyfriend's back and I went, oh my God, I see the muscles. I see where everything is. Oh my God, I have X-ray vision, which is apparently true for a lot of people who were there. They were reflecting in it in our WhatsApp group, and people who are experienced say that happens. And that's awesome, but I don't feel changed as a teacher. I don't feel like I am teaching differently at this point, you know, for this experience that I had, but I'm surprisingly blank when I go, oh, this experience has evolved me, has changed me, has blah, blah, blah. I don't really have much of that. I'm really thrilled and I'm grateful to have had the experience. And I think there's still a lot that I am chewing on, but the reflections aren't coming daily. I don't know if I've made sense of all of it beyond the literal experience of it. You know, I haven't found the pedagogical strategies from what I was holding in my hand, though every once in a while I think, what about those V's, you know? But then my mind's eye goes somewhere else. Like this doesn't feel like a great value, other than what we didn't really finish that story, but we saw all these V's, and then there was somebody in the room who was very experienced and more there to watch and observe, and I chatted with her frequently, and I think actually she works with Gil Headley. She didn't tell me that, she told somebody else that, but she is a very experienced anatomist, and we were theorizing, and I said, well, if there are these V's going this way, then there would have to be something to counterbalance that. If this is energy moving in this direction, there would be something to counterbalance that. And we imagined like V's going upwards. And then the next day, when this was gone, and we were looking at the vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae, through the fascia of the neck was all of these V's going upwards like huts, and beautiful, geometrical. And that is one thought that I've been having, that I've been chewing on the last day or so, is how feathered the body looks. That muscles move inwards, fascia moves inwards in this feathering kind of way, moving in towards a seam, moving in towards a seam, moving in towards a seam, and on these diagonals, creating triangles, creating stability in the body. If you I don't know if you play with oh, I wish I had my geomags with me. If you make little shapes, if you make a cube, like take toothpicks and glue them into a cube, that thing will fall right apart. But if instead of a cube, you make a triangle, it will hold its stability. And if you make a tetrahedron, which is a four-sided triangle, it will hold its stability. Anything you build on a triangle will hold its stability. It's the most stable shape, which is why geodesic dome homes, triangulated. What do they call it? It's not keystone. Is that keystone in the 90-degree traditional architecture, where they put the little diagonal thing in every doorway to triangulate and give it stability, whatever that's called? Cross bracing, same thing, right? Adding a bunch of triangles, that gives us stability. And so there are those spirals, though. That's the small picture that I was able to understand with my eye. But when, you know, May got thrown under the bus a little bit, because I said, oh, well, look at all these V's. And then when she reflected that later in the day, Joanne Avison said, but they're not V's, because if they continue, which they do, they become X's. And if they continue around the sphere, which they do, they become spirals, and they become this, and she just kept going, because she is living at this so far overhead view of understanding the body that she's able to see that what I'm seeing as a V, I'm looking here, thinking I'm seeing a bigger picture, which is bigger than the one I saw before. She's like, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, look all the way around. And that's true in every depth, because there's no layers, but the layers seem like they're there, which is another example of the same thing, that you can cut something into a layer because fascia is this weave that just keeps going. And there's so much of it that you can easily create a layer between the fibers. And when I was trying to move into the masseter and the jaw and the temporalis on the other side, I was being so careful to not cut away anything I wanted to see that I was like, okay, it was layer, and I was like, okay, it was layer, and maybe 7, 8 layers of fabric that was a millimeter thick. But it wasn't really layers. I was making layers with the scalpel. There are no layers. I was just creating them because the fascia is a weave. And so you can cut sort of in between what is perceived as a layer, but is truly connected. And I've seen an interesting model for this in a Jello mold of some clear gelatin, gelatinized or solidified or whatever happens to gelatin, and then somebody put some spaghetti, dry spaghetti on it, and then put another layer of gelatin and then spaghetti in another direction and another layer of gelatin, spaghetti, and created a weave in this Jello mold of clear gelatin, and said, you know, you can make this into layers, but show me where the layer is in the gelatin. You can create it. You can cut between the spaghetti, but you're doing that. This is not layered. And gelatin is made of collagen. Collagen is what we're made of. It's the same stuff. So it's a good model for understanding. If you look at a Jello mold, you know, like that's all a big mass of stuff. There's no differentiating where the Jello would be separated in layers. You know, you've seen those Jello layered colors. And as a kid, I used to love that. And I'd always want to like eat one layer at a time, but it's impossible. It's like you can't figure out where one begins and ends. It is not a clear delineation, but it sure looks like it is. Sure looks like it is. Other thoughts, feelings, questions, curiosities? So one of the things that I really thought about was the remnants of humanity in the room. And that was real emotional and important. Every day when I was coming back to the same cadaver, you know, I thanked him a lot, and it was like, you know, there's just sort of like a reverence, and we, you know, there's a real appreciation. They talked very, very eloquently about the sacrifice these people made for us to learn, and that their family don't get closure. They don't have an open casket if they want that. They don't bury a body. This person wanted to further science by donating their body. And so there's a real respect we have for these forms. And so every day I was sort of like, thank you, you know, like when I, you know, started to dissect parts of the face, it was like, sorry, but that's what you wanted. This is what you're here for. And this is what I'm here for. And so you're teaching me to teach others. So their life moves onwards through my hands into my understanding, into my teaching at some point. And so they are a continuity, just like we are a continuity, and we are a continuity. And there was a point where I said, should I name him? Should I give this person a name? And then I was like, do not name this person, because first of all, they had a name. They're not here anymore. Their soul has moved on. And don't make them a human. Don't imbue them with life that they don't have, because that's not going to make it easier to learn from. That's going to make it harder. That's going to make them more alive than they wished to be in this moment. And it's not helping anybody. It just felt so impersonal. I'm looking at somebody's face as if it has an expression. It has an expression of rigor mortis, like it has an expression of stiffness. It has an expression of embalmed and dehydrated. It's not somebody who's going, why? It's just a dead body. And so don't do it. Don't go there. But there were all these remnants of humanity all over the place. You know, when we found his pacemaker, it's like, this guy had a heart thing. And then based on his positioning, we actually wondered if maybe it was hooked into the vagus nerve and that he was epileptic. And depending on the side, they say usually if the pacemaker's on the left, it's actually going to the brain through the vagus nerve, and if it's on the right, it's going to the heart. And his pacemaker was on the left. So we theorized it was going to the heart. And let me tell you, that wire is like, There's a whole lot of cabling in there, but it was fascinating seeing how the fascia grew around the pacemaker in a completely different way, where it was presents as one would expect in the body and every other place. It was like smooth, silly putty color, and smooth like silly putty. Nothing like anywhere else in the body. It was so fascinating how the body adapted around a foreign object inside of it. Fascinating. A whole different presentation. It's interacting with something completely foreign to it, so it presents in a different way. So there was that interesting sort of clue about this person. So that was very, very interesting. And the other form that I was working on, whose vocal tract and larynx I was able to reflect, this was like just really sort of touching, is that she had fresh pink paint on her nails. Beautiful manicure. And you just make up a story, you know, that was important to her. Grandma always had her pink nails, and she would want them. She would still want them. It's just those, you know, who's that family, you know, who's grandma am I learning through? Lots of things. The gentleman that May and I were talking about earlier, who was younger, he was 57, a very big guy. I wouldn't say he was like morbidly obese. He was just a big guy, big bones, big everything, but he was so young and looked like he hadn't been dead as long as the other people in the room, other cadavers in the room. And we didn't, you know, like, we didn't see faces right away. They're covered in cloths, and we just opened what we wanted to work on. But by, you know, a couple days in, you know, it was like, we're all desensitized and fine with it. But just to see his face and see his face in comparison to other faces on other tables, was just makes you think. Just makes you think a little bit, you know. It's too young to be in that room. And the pathology that we were able to intuit based on where his fat was in his body. Like, there is, you know, if you squish on your arm, you're squishing on superficial fascia, which is the sort of bubble wrap like fascia that snugs the fat in place. Fat being a functional organ. And when you open up into the viscera, you see fat. There's fat kind of everywhere, but not a lot of it. But this man's organs were encased in fat. Like, literally everything was encased, completely densely packed in beautiful, bright yellow, this color. When they reflected his skin, it was like a sun was just shining in the room. And it was such an odd thought, because it was like that. I kept saying, that is so beautiful. I mean, I was really blown away by how beautiful lots of things are in the body. But that was like, you might know I like colors. That was like the sun from the inside, but also how we've created an enemy out of fat, and how that, you know, we've created this awful thing by having fat in the body. It's beautiful. It looks absolutely, nature makes crazy colors. And sorry, I got a little distracted. But the reality is that he had a lot of fat where fat shouldn't have been. And so there's this juxtaposition of this beauty and of color and texture, and then also what that indicates about this man's health. And it certainly is something that I think about more often than I ever would before. You know, that's not where it's supposed to be, and that can happen.
Jeremy, are you one of the things on my mind is are you now, I know you say you don't reflect on it, but are you more curious about your own body? Are you still exploring yourself through what you've learned?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I am. I feel like I'm still sort of chipping away at the surface of the of the experience, and it hasn't sunken into my soul in terms of functional movement, or it hasn't come into pedagogy, I was saying before. There are certain things that I think about, but I also recognize that I focused on very specific things. I saw a lot, but I focused on specific things. And where I focused my eye, I have a keener line of sight when I see somebody else. So I spent some time at a different table looking at the back muscles, because they reflected the skin and the superficial fascia so beautifully that you could see the latissimus dorsi, you could see these beautiful shapes, you could see the beautiful geometry in there, and I just was taken by it. So I was looking at it for a while, and then when I saw somebody's back, I was like, there it all is. But I looked at it, I had an imprint of it. So it was very clear to me there, and the V's like I'm talking about here, and the upside down V's here, I think about those things, and I think about the tongue, and I think about the continuity. But I haven't thought about the continuity of the pharynx into the larynx into the vocal folds while I'm singing. This is the first time that's crossing my mind. It hasn't gotten there yet. And maybe it's just a matter of time before I go, well, if I talk to the body, just like saying earlier in this hour, like we might want the body to be one way, but it might not be that way. So once we have some nearer truths about the body, we can align our intentions more to the reality. And so why am I not practicing knowing that my pharynx wraps inside my thyroid cartilage from which the vocal folds arise? Why am I not bringing that image, that functional image, that image that may be true in all forms, may not? Maybe that's just the way this person presented. Now, I did ask John Sharkey about that, because they were all in the room. They weren't helping us do anything, but we could ask questions, and they come over and they explain things or show us things. I mean, they were wonderfully helpful, but they weren't saying now do this or now do that. They were just letting us do what we wanted. And I said, like, this is really interesting to me. And he goes, well, embryologically speaking, it makes complete sense. And I said, well, go on. And he said, oh, I can't do that in 5 minutes. Like, give me the night, and then maybe I can think of a quicker narrative to blah, blah. And then I was talking to Joanne Avison about it, and she was saying how it's I think the second most sort of complicated area to understand embryologically speaking, but that she's interested in understanding it better. So she'll talk to Jaap van der Wal, who's the community of Biotensegrity, that's sort of the embryologist that is a part of that community and is connected to all those folks, and he and Joanne are close. So she's like, I will find out for you. And she's the person to learn embryology from, because she's a storyteller. And so there's more that will unfold, so to speak, when it comes to understanding why that is how it is, and why John Sharkey was not shocked at all. That's just how it is, and it makes complete sense.
Yeah, maybe you look in the mirror now and start thinking differently. Or maybe it would just sink in as a kind of knowing. I know you said you haven't sort of consciously used it, but we collect things and it becomes just a knowing that, yeah, just a knowing that feeds into other things.
That's it. And I truly believe that. I remember when I started my Feldenkrais journey through that 800-hour training, which is still not done, but I remember my mentor at the time, who was a Feldenkrais practitioner, he said, don't try to look for meaning for singing teaching, just have the experience. It'll come through you when it comes through you. And of course, I'm thinking in every lesson, ooh, this is useful in this way. I'm totally doing the opposite. I'm absolutely looking for ways of connecting the dots. And I taught for a little while, like trying to connect the dots. And then, like that all fades, because it doesn't go very far. It falls apart after a while when you're just trying to apply something and push it in. But a little while later, I'm noticing the verbiage change, and I'm noticing the thoughts and ideas change, and I'm noticing the interactions change. I'm going, okay, something's coming through me in a different way right now. And this is a different way of communicating, a different way of thinking, and I'm understanding where it came from and understanding the time it takes for the assimilation of some newness in the mental model to reconcile with the previous ideas in the mental model. And so I imagine that this will be similar to that. And I also want to do it again. I want to do it yearly if I can afford it. And I think it would create a terrific feedback loop. I didn't make the reflections online on purpose, actually. Just after the first day, I was like, I should write down some of this stuff. And then when I did, I remembered so many more things that happened in that day that I said, do this every day, no matter what. And even if I do it the next day, and I forced myself sometimes, because it was not, I didn't have a ton of time, but I forced myself early morning to just write and remember as much as I could and just write and write and write. And then I posted them on Facebook and went, oh, this is a good idea, because in a year, I will be reminded of these and I'll read them and I will feel things about them that I didn't feel the day I wrote them. And I will reflect back on those reflections, understanding them in a better way and having more information, more knowledge, more assimilation in my mental model. And then if I do it again, and next year with this team in North America is in New York in December, so then I'll get to read these reflections a few weeks before, hopefully I do it again, and write reflections after each of those days. And then a year from then, I'll get the feedback loop cycle of the reflections from whatever year into the experience, into other reflections, into other experiences, and just allow that to be something that I dedicate my time to, because it's the most, I can't use the word visceral because it's too relevant in a different way, but it's the most honest experience I've had of learning that's untainted. Nobody brought anything into the space that would guide learning in any way other than providing space for us to learn and see. And the learning was nonlinear. It's not, at the end of this day, I learned these things. I saw some things, and I suppose that's learning in one way. But what I really learned, I don't know yet. And that will present when it presents. And there's no rush. I'm doing okay. So far, I think. But this is what I said every day, probably 50 times a day. It's something else, because I didn't have any other words. It was just something else, something I'd never experienced before, and I just didn't have words to say besides it's something else, which is so neither here nor there, but it's exactly what it was. Just a unique experience that I hope will not remain unique. I hope that I'll have more of them. And certainly it was a wonderful experience to be in the room with such masters, and not just the team leaders, but other people in the room, like I was describing, the anatomists and the brain surgeons and people who were there to have felt sense. There was one man who is a chiropractor, but his perspective is through neurology into chiropractic. And so anytime there was a brain, he was right there and he was showing us everything. And it was amazing, the knowledge in the room and the prowess. And then on top of that, we had presentations every morning by somebody else on the dissection team, including Neil Thiese, who's a liver pathologist, but he discovered that stem cells aren't just in certain places. Like we thought stem cells were only in the brain stem, and then they were the brain stem and I think the liver. And then he's like, no, they're everywhere. They're everywhere in the body. And his research is around the interstitium, which is the virtual spaces within the fascia where the hyaluronic acid is. And so because he discovered some stuff about the interstitium, he's now a part of the fascial community. And so we have a pathologist in the room, we've got an anatomist in the room, we've got a scholar in the room, we've got we had for a day we had Glenn Gaudette in our room, which was amazing. He is the team leader of the research lab in Boston that created functional beating heart tissue out of a leaf of spinach. And he walked us through all the stages of how that happened. And he said, the question we're always asked is, when did you get the aha moment? And he said, we're still waiting for it. He said, we didn't think this was anything. We just sort of said, one of the problems with heart replacement is the vascularization, how the blood's going to flow through. And if you think of, vascularization like a tree with branches, similar to the lungs, another fractal, the vegetables have that. leaves have that. And so he thought, well, can we decellularize the spinach leaf? Can we strip it of the spinach cells so it's just a piece of tissue? And then they did, and they're like, oh, cool, we didn't know we could do that. And they were like, and then they looked at the top and they were like, well, this is a tube. This top is a tube. Can we use it like a tube and send some stained dye in it? And if we send some stained dye in it, will it travel along the pathways like we need for vascularization for hearts? And it did, and it leaked out the bottom. Like, oh my God, we can do that. And they kept asking the next question. Can we do this with it? Can we do this with it? And so we've got a piece of spinach inside of a mouse, and this is by bioengineer. But we have Neil Thiese in the room, who's a pathologist. And so he stands right up and starts looking at those slides. And he's like, look at that. There's no inflammation response. This is not a tissue that's being rejected. This is a tissue that's being accepted and is functional. So it was fascinating watching these amazing people in the room nudging each other along, because the biomechanist, is going to do what a biomechanist does, and a pathologist is going to do what a pathologist does. And they tend to not be together in a room together, but when they're in a room together, they're looking at the same slides in a completely different way. And they're nudging each other along. I was in the room where it happened for a few days, where these amazing people were just sort of like bumping each other's own areas of interest a little bit further. And that I've come to learn is actually one of the things that Neil Thiese is championing for, is let's stop siloing all of these areas of specialty, because we need to have them in conversation with each other. Because whether we want areas of specialty to be areas of specialty, they are not areas of specialty in the body. In the body, they are systems that are interacting with the other systems. So we might want to look at the bones doing something, our skeletal system, but it's not working without fascia, which isn't working without skin. Lymph inside of fascia, fat inside of fascia, endocrine system inside of fascia. Yeah, I mean, like, fascia is the thing that's holding it all together, and it's a communication medium. So we might want things to be specialized, and we might want to only look into one area and become specialists ourselves, but that doesn't align with what the body is, which is a completely interactive system of system of system of system of system of systems of systems. It's all working together as one. And when we try to treat it like it's not, we just sort of bump it into a different kind of dysfunction. So when Glenn was there, we did heart dissection. Watching him, something else. I mean, he was just an artist, and he's wearing a suit. Like, he's just not scrubbed up. He's just like showing us all of this. It's just outstanding. And we use the I think they're called Sky View or something, the overhead lights that have a camera in it, so we could see it on the screen. And I mean, it was a light show. It was just something else. It was just something else. Those are the only words I have. It was something else. Yeah, my mom, Ellen, over there to the right of my Zoom screen, has wrote in the chat, I will be curious and excited to hear if, when you are working with your students, insights come up that align with your work in that moment that you can share in some practical way to help your students. Me too. Me too. I'm sort of waiting for it. And just available to it. And we'll see, how the other sort of areas that I love to, dip my toes in and learn in, and how that all interacts. And it is cool because I am listening to the podcast that I've always listened to, but I'm hearing them in a new way, and I'm able to visualize them in a new way. So I guess there is part of the extension of the learning is listening to Jean-Claude Gamberteau talk with Joanne Avison on the podcast. 20 minutes in, it gets real spicy. Joanne Avison podcast, most recent episode, gets real good, where he's just talking about from the chaos arises stability, and they're talking about the microvacuole collagenous system of blah blah blah. It is like wackadoodle, but I'm listening to those words and I'm creating an image that I understand. Like, that's cool. I know what this means and I know what it implies. And so that's cool, but I don't know. As a voice teacher, where does that put me? But as a curious learner, that puts me right where I belong as a curious learner. Maria.
It's a good start.
Maria, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I recognize the whole. I've discovered something. I am chewing on something. There is new learning here. I don't know how it applies yet, and I would just like to encourage you and just confirm that it's happening. It is happening after the fact. I started the anatomy training and the massage training 7 years ago, and I'm learning new things now as I meet clients that have different needs. So this is, you can just, I love that you're so confident in it already, because you haven't maybe gone as far yet to experience that this is how it works. But it really is just implementing itself through your curiosity. And curiosity is really the best value and the best value that you can have as a learner, as someone who wants to learn, someone who wants to teach. And I think you really should be both to be able to excel at any of these things. As a singer, as a performer, certainly as a singing teacher. And it'll be really fun to see what happens when this starts to be applied anatomy, applied physics.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you. It's totally true. It's totally true. One of the people who's been a mentor to me on and off over the years, Tom Burke, I remember years ago, he said, my favorite 2 words are curiosity and investigation. I was like, absolutely and absolutely. 100%. That's the best. And like, just as a mantra, curiosity and investigation, it can't lead you into anything other than learning. But that you also remind me, Maria, of what they say in a Feldenkrais lesson, that you experience the lesson, but your nervous system is working for several hours after that, integrating the lesson into your body. So just move soft, be gentle with yourself. I didn't even think about that. I should just move a little softer and not try to push this into the foreground.
Exactly. Like, give up the push.
Yeah.
Just melt into it.
I love that. Floor is open. I think I said a lot.
Yeah. I think on that wonderful note, I smile because we're also good at seeing that with other people and sort of reminding them of it. And then when it comes to us, we forget it. even you.
Yeah.
It's in there. Okay, people, it's kind of getting on quite late for me, so I'm going to bid you all good night. And thank you, Jeremy. That was fascinating. I loved your posts, and that was fascinating to see how it's evolving. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Maggie. Sleep tight.
Hey, and good night, all. Bye.
Lisa, did you have your hand up?
I mean, I did, but I think like everyone here, your enthusiasm is so contagious. And I really enjoyed what was it Maria just shared, but I feel like my reflection of knowing you and your work is that you have some confirmation of what has sparked your curiosity and investigation. And you might not have a new language for it yet. Like, I think the beauty is in also just confirming, like, this is the shit I'm meant to study. Like, what I do with it, I don't know, but I think I'm meant to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm meant to learn more and then share as I know. But I don't know. I think just even the big picture, like, this is the stuff I want to continue to synthesize or understand, or even just say to everyone, it's all connected. And I can tell you because I saw it. And that just be the basis for any teachings you do. I don't know. There's just something like big picture about it that feels it like that's enough on its own. And whatever happens from there, it only gets more beautiful. But thank you so much for sharing your reflections.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for being here, Lisa. Lisa's a terrific music therapist in Colorado. I did leave going, well, should I go to osteopathy school? Should I be chasing should I be going back to school for something? This is not what I ever dreamed of. I'm kind of have a, not quite a love-hate relationship with academia, but I'm definitely glad to be distanced from it. So I don't necessarily want to look at 4 more years of it to become an osteopath, to be a better voice teacher. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm very interested in cranial sacral right now. There's some real rad stuff going on in that area, but maybe it's just enrichment. We'll see. Well,
I had this experience when I started doing the anatomy training instead of pursuing the opera career, that things just came to me. And I'm relying on that now as well, because I have people asking me, could you do a doctorate at our school? Could you please apply for a PhD with our school and we'll employ you afterward? And I just have absolutely zero excitement about academia. Just doing the whole track, the whole standardized measurement system of status, it really puts me off. So I think I would just advise you to follow your joy, follow whatever feels like it's filled with joy and filled with inspiration for you, because I don't think there's any choice you could make from that place of curiosity and wanting to learn that will steer you astray. Yeah, and I don't know, have any of you seen the movie Donnie Darko?
Oh, years ago.
Yes, there's this thing, he has this thing come out of his abdomen. There's this energy that leads him away. Of course, he's high as a house and stoned out on something I don't even know what is, but he's seeing his life force coming out of his abdomen and leading him to these big solutions and clues in his life that there's no way that he could know they were there beforehand. But I just feel that energy. I feel that energy for myself, and I feel it from you too, where you're just being led by something within you that's bigger than what you know and what you know how to articulate. And just follow that, because I think that's going to get you where you want to go.
Wherever that is, totally.
Wherever that is.
I'm 100% on board and in agreement. Absolutely. There's something nudging me in a direction that I was saying how, like, I scratched an itch I didn't know I had. I fulfilled a dream I wasn't dreaming. I didn't ever, 10 years ago, I never imagined I'd be in an anatomy lab, like dissecting cadavers. I've never touched a dead body like any of my grandparents that I've been in the room with. Like, it's not been a fascination of mine. It's not something that I looked forward to in my life, though I certainly looked forward to what happened a couple weeks ago. And I even said, like, if we get there and they say, we forgot to get bodies, let's just talk for a week, that would be amazing. I would just love to just chat with those folks for a week. The bodies and the bodies became sort of like the second attraction, because the presentations were so amazing. The way these folks were sharing their knowledge and their gifts and leading us in a real experiential way. There was this thing that John Sharkey had that was like an electric circuit. And when one person held one end and another person held the other end, it would light up and make a noise. It would light up and make a noise. And as an experiment, we all held hands. There were about 35 of us total. We all held hands, and then he put one end in my hand and one end in the person next to me, and the thing made its noise. And then he went over to the other side of the circle and told 2 people, stop holding hands, and it stopped making noise, that it was carrying the electric current through all of us. And when that was broken anywhere in the circle, the current didn't travel through. It wasn't just me and her, but all of our energy combined was making this thing light up and make noise, that there is a reality to how energy travels through us and how we're a part of each other. Fascinating too, when he took this thing and put it on somebody's scar, and how it didn't make this, it kind of went, it made a warped version of the noise it made in a regular rhythm, which was a real cool example of how scar tissue doesn't transmit energy in the same way. And for the anatomist in the room who does such fine-tuned detail work, there was nothing in his arm until it was up here. weird, but it's where the woo-woo meets the worldly, as Tom would say. And you know you're on to something good when you're in a room of spiritualists who are scientists, like world-renowned scientists who are also Buddhist priests, you know, like that they are able to hold the science and the spirit in the same breath. So this, Maria, is when I was like, these are the people. These are the people to learn from, because they're not in either camp. They're able to see both and hold both, live in a dual place. My father always wants me to be a cantor and or be a professor. And so after I wrote the first reflection, he said, I read what you wrote. You need to be a professor. I was like, I just was one. I don't want to be one again. And I said, let me use Neil Thiese as an example, because I fangirl over Neil Thiese. His work was amazing. I said, he's a liver pathologist at NYU. And he talks about this, that he's a liver pathologist at NYU, but his worldwide platform is talking about complexity theory, chaos, Buddhism, spirituality. That's his platform. His book that's coming out May something, because he kept promoting it, you can pre-order it now, is on consciousness and complexity. It has nothing to do with the liver. But he said, you know, the whole world can think I'm crazy, but at the end of the day, I've got a good paying job as a liver pathologist. His worldwide platform is so different than his profession. It's like, these are the people to learn from. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thanks for listening and participating. And I hope there's some things that you can chew on and be in touch. And I know all of you. So thanks for being here. It's nice to see all of you. See you another time, y'all. Stay well.
So before you go, Jeremy, I just wanted to tell you that I talked to